Howdy everybody. So I have been given the absolute privilege, even though I'm not community engagement, to release the Beast Herd balance updates for this year. There are a couple other guys who are going to do it, but with quite a busy time at the moment and quite a short time frame to get the stuff produced, it wasn't really working out for them. So your boy has gotten the call up, which means that I get to not be community engagement, but also still get all the insider goodies. So, just call me Hannah Montana, best of both worlds. I'm going to look at the Arcane Compendium changes that I think are particularly relevant to Beast Herds. I'm going to chuck into the notes of the video just a full list of the changes in case anyone's curious about everything. And when I post this up to the forums, I'll also include the full list that you can see it. Particularly because some people don't want to listen to me rambling. They'd rather just read what's happening. So it's just as good to get you the information however you want it. I'm only looking at Beast Herd specific stuff because it's all I really care about. And other people are covering other armies, so, I can just focus on Beast Herd if I like. Starting off with the Arcane Compendium, I've just sort of put this across into what I view as buffs, what I view as nerfs, and what I'm not really sure on. So starting off with the buffs, Lightning Vambraces has gone down in points, and now rather than being the, whatever it was, like 2d6 strength 3 AP 0 or something, kind of not very valuable, it's Hand of Heaven. So the unboosted version, which is just random d6 hits, d6 strength at AP 2. Which is better than Lightning Vambraces because it's got the potential to do more. I'm not 100% sure that it will effectively change the kind of builds Beast Herds are likely to see because they're not able to supplement that with other magic damage very well. They've got, I guess the damage available to Beast Herds would be Swarm of Insects, kind of Totem Beast because it's got the Breath Weapon, but not really. So mainly Swarm of Insects, which isn't much of a damage spell, if we're honest. It's good in some instances, obviously, and good against war machines, but like if you're building a magic damage phase, you're not going like Swarm of Insects is one of my top choices. The Master of Earth from Druidism, which is fine, it's just there's not enough other spells available, really. But I guess if you went Lightning Vambraces on one of your characters, you went with a Druidism Adept to get Master of Earth, and then you went with a Evocation Master to get 2 snipes, you might start to approach sort of having a decent range damage phase, particularly because you'd still have some pretty decent combat buffs. So that might be an option to look into, basically. I don't know how it would work, and I don't quite know if the damage is good enough when you compare it to, say, Occultism or Thaumaturgy, but it's an option I think that is worth considering, which probably wasn't worth considering before you had the change to Lightning Vambraces, so I think that might be interesting. Healing Waters has got plus 6 inches of range, so that's actually fairly significant for sort of promoting apprentices and adepts, which was one of the purposes of this update, basically. I think it helps Beast Herd ambushing wizards, and being able to measure from the wizard or from water. I think the extra 6 inches of range could actually be pretty significant in a lot of cases. Dance Macabre has been changed to be 18-inch range. I should have noted it down. I think it was 12-inch range before. And rather than an 8-inch move, it's a 12-inch move. I still think this is a fairly limited spell, but there might be situations where, particularly with the Beast Herd list focusing on single models or having like raiding chariots, like anything with light troops, I think it might be valuable for, basically just because 12-inch move on a ranked unit, you probably don't have them in a position where 12 inches is going to be really significant on them. You've done your movement phase and then you've managed to get the spell off. You wouldn't have them in a position where they need that 12-inch move, typically. So when something's got light troops or whatever and its options are a lot more wide, I guess, just because it can, or a single model where it can just freely pivot and go wherever it wants, it might be more valuable, but I still think it's probably a fairly limited spell. If you're a Beast Herd Evoc Master and you're going with damage, you probably... So if you go with the 2 snipes on him, you probably want Spectral Blades and Whispers of the Veil anyway, so you're probably not going to take it. But if you're not going for the snipes and you've got an Evoc Master, I think there'd be a time when you go, I'm taking Spectral Blades, I'm taking Whispers of the Veil. Why would you take a Master when you've got 2 free spells when you only really want the first 2? I don't think it's going to be that significant, but I mean, it's better now, so if someone can find a good use for it, good-o. And Banner of Discipline has gone down from 30 points to 20 points, which isn't huge, but I've got a couple of character builds and stuff later on that I think it's helpful to have that on. So, if at the worst thing, Beast Herds are an army that often like to have Banner of Discipline on some of their units, so making it cheaper is never going to be bad. In terms of nerfs, the most disappointing one to me, unfortunately, is Rangers Brutes are now standard infantry only. So they've killed the advanced 10 Centaur Chieftain. I don't think I've seen the reason for all of the changes. Like, that one's just one of the changes. It's not like part of an overarching thing where they're trying to make Apprentices and Adepts more viable compared to Masters, but it's disappointing. I know there were some concerns over the Infernal Dwarf bloke, so if you take the Turuk Ritual and you put the Ranger's Boots on him, he goes to advance 9. It's a little bit disappointing that this hits our Centaur Chief, because I really liked the Destiny's Call Ranger's Boots Centaur Chief. I thought it was a really handy piece. And I'm disappointed to see it go. But at the same time, I think the Ranger's Boots thematically are more there to help infantry than to make a super fast, pseudo cav character who can only take it because he's like not a mounted cav thinger. So I think it's reasonable. I'm disappointed, but it's kind of understandable. Sorry, excuse me. Druidism attribute is now only once per turn, which I don't think matters very much. It matters for some very specific builds, I would think. Like my Beast Herds, where I've got 3 Chariot characters and 2 Masters, where I get quite a few spells. Like I often get 2 spells off in a phase, because I've got, +1 to cast on both my wizards. I've got a lot of fairly low casting value things. Sometimes I would be pumping out a spell that's not that handy just to heal a wound on one of those Chariot characters, because they're so... it's really hard to wound my Beast Lord on Razor Tusk Chariot. It's a lot easier to wound a Gortak. So even though like the value in terms of like points value per wound, the Gortak is still really high. It's harder to do the wounds to the Beast Lord on Razor Tusk Chariot. So it's like it's more valuable in my opinion to heal him. And there were it's hard to say because I wasn't paying that much attention, but I feel like there were often games where I would get maybe 2 turns where I got off 2 heals. So you take that away. Like this is a list that in my opinion, that's probably the hardest hit by this Druidism nerf, and it's not that significant. Like, because 2 things happened there. 1, it didn't happen that much, but 2, it means that my spell selection and my priority of what I'm casting in the magic phase changes, because now I don't have the Druidism attribute to cast more than once. Maybe I don't cast the Druidism spell and I cast the spell that's more important to that turn. Like if I've got, if +1 toughness is more valuable than 5-up regen, and whereas before I've gone, I'll cast the 5-up regen because what I actually want is to heal this character. So 5-up regen isn't as good, but it's important to heal the character. Now I would just go, well, I'll cast the +1 toughness, so it's not even like losing just the attribute. It's like, well, I've upgraded in the game situation what I was going to cast to something else. And part of that is that the package of attribute and regen in that situation might have been better for me in like what my assessment of the situation was better in that situation, say, than the +1 toughness. But spell for spell, +1 toughness was better, so it's not even like a net. It's like a net nerf, I guess, but it's not that bad. And other lists, realistically, if you've just got a Druidism Master and maybe some bound spells, I can't imagine you're very often getting off 2 Druidism spells per turn. It would basically just be like a really unlucky dispel phase for your opponent that lets that go through. So there's a lot of things that need to factor in where you need to have multiple models within 12 inches of your Druidism caster that need a wound healed. Because you still already couldn't heal the same model twice. You need to get 2 Druidism spells off. I think from almost all lists, I'd say it basically doesn't matter. It's just removed like a very unlucky phase for the opponent getting slightly worse. So I don't really know what they're trying to achieve with it, but I don't think that it's a problem for almost anyone. I think it's fine. So again, some very specific lists like mine hurt from it a little bit, but I really think it's almost an unimportant change that people have talked about it being like a huge nerf, and it just it isn't. Like, that is wrong. I don't care what your list is, it's not that big a deal. So I wouldn't be too worried about it, basically. Fireball is now replicable, and the attribute on Pyromancy is changed to 24 inches and Strength 5. I think both of those are a little bit bad for Beast Herds. Like, I think we're just sort of, a bit like elves, particularly Sylvan elves. We're a bit vulnerable to Fireball, more so than armies with armor. Sylvan elves are worse off than us because they don't have armor or toughness. But it's probably not a good thing if we see armies spamming Fireball for us. I don't know that that's going to be a viable approach. I think maybe there'll be armies that, take a couple of Fireballs, and maybe that's slightly bad. I don't think it's all that important, but it could crop up, particularly in skewed lists where they've decided, hey, for a laugh, I'm going to take, 10 goblins with Pyromancy and an apprentice. That might be bad for Beast Herds. And Blaze, I think going from 18 to 24 inches is bad for us just because that means the wizard is probably safe. Whereas previously, if you've brought up a wizard to be 18 inches away from whatever he's casting his strength 6 at, a lot of the time that's putting him in danger of getting charged. So I actually kind of liked the trade-off on Blaze, where if the enemy wanted to get most value out of it, they had to be in a bit of danger rather than just sitting back. So I'm disappointed by that, but I mean, 1 less strength, some extra range, whatever. I don't think they're all that different from the D3 strength 4 AP 0 additional hits it did 2 years ago, so whatever. Basalt Infusion has just gone up by 5 points. Slight nerf. There's a lot of Razor Tusk Chariot builds that use Basalt. Maybe some Minnow Warlords builds as well. BSB on Chariots. But it's probably worth... The one that's probably worse for is probably the BSB. I think, because with 100 point allowance, it might break some combos. But I haven't run that in a while. That'd take you Dustforge and Basalt now to 95 points. So you couldn't fit Aether Icon on him. Which, I mean, again, hits builds that I used to do when I did the Chariot Star, but when I had a BSB. But I don't think if you're running a BSB on a Chariot and you're not running them in a unit of characters, you probably don't take 1 Aether Icon, so it's probably not that significant. Yeah, it's probably fine. But it's a slight nerf, and the problem with even a 5 point increase there is if you're at 200 points on your item allowance, or if you're at 100 points on your item allowance, it can break some things, which is always really annoying. because sometimes you just don't, like, you can't do the same kind of build again, which there's no way to fix, basically. The ones that I'm not sure on, I'm going to come back to Crown of Autocracy because it's a little bit more in depth than Spirits of the Wood. Spirits of the Wood has basically just changed, said it's now 18-inch range rather than 12. You don't have to have Thrown Up in order for it to be universal, but if you don't have Thrown Up, it's type damage. So basically, you can always cast it on the enemy, but you can't cast it onto them if they're in combat unless you have Thrown Up. So you can't charge in and then cast it on them to break their steadfast. So because of that, I'm still not sure that it's that useful, because you still need to have Thrown Up, I think, for it to be useful as a steadfast breaking tool. You can cast it as like a, these guys are going to come in, and he's going to try and say you had a monster or a valuable character, a single model. They're going to, like, this unit that's ranked is going to charge in and just tie me up so he can get counter charges in. It does work now that you could go, well, I'm going to cast Spirits of the Wood on them so that they're no longer steadfast. So it's unreliable for them to try and tie up my scary character. That's kind of, and I guess it would also be useful on things like Chariots or Cavalry, where you can force them to take DTs. But then it's sort of just a discount version of Break the Spirit that's worse. So I don't know that it would be that useful. It's more useful for Sylvan Elves, where they make every forest DT. So then again, it's still, they can access Shamanism as well. So yeah. The reason why I'm not really sure, and I'm like, it's obviously not a nerf. It's now a stronger spell, but I'm just thinking, I don't really see when it's going to become relevant very often. But I do sort of think about it and I go, like, when I play Druidism and I take a master, I'm going Healing Waters, Stone Skin, Summer Growth, almost always. And that third spell oftentimes is just like sort of open, and I don't have much to do with it. So in that case, you might be able to now go, well, it's slightly better, 18-inch range makes it easier to use. Maybe I'll try it out, and maybe you can get some good use out of it when you actually have that as an option. Because taking up the spell slot is almost the more important thing than not having that. Like, so it's not as powerful as Stone Skin, it's not as powerful as Healing Waters, it's not as powerful as Summer Growth. But a little bit like the Beast Herd Hereditary, if it's useful enough in specific enough circumstances, if you can get it as a spell selection without losing much else, maybe it'll come up often enough that it's worth taking, I guess. Alright, the Crown of Autocracy changes are a topic of a bit of debate. So, across the game, they're a little bit contentious. I think it's... So basically the change is that it's gone down from 65 to 30 points, but it's no longer +1 discipline. What it does is it gives your model 3-inch Commanding Precense range, or if it already has Commanding Precense, it gives you +3 inches. And I think that's to a maximum of 18. Like, you can't make a Towering Presence general 21 inches with it. So, for Orcs, I think it's bad. Particularly all Goblins, where you like, because Goblins are taking a lot of leadership tests, in terms of, like, they're generally losing combat and just trying to grind you down, so taking lots of steadfast break tests. I think it's quite significant for them. For Beast Herds, I'm not sure. I think the 15-inch bubble could be quite handy. I think that there's a lot of times where... So say you take a Soothsayer General, there's a lot of lists, in my opinion, where having him be Leadership 9 doesn't really matter. I've played a lot of lists where my General is just Leadership 8, because it's Soothsayer. I chuck the Crown of Horns on him, so I auto-pass Primal Fury. And, I mean, basically, it can be an issue. It can be an issue in terms of... Because normally, if you've got a leadership 8 general, you're not relying on like a stubborn block of Longhorns, for instance. You probably are not taking a tar pit unit of Wild Horns, but Centaurs, Minotaurs, any of your monsters, you're not relying on them to be steadfast. So if they lose a combat and you're like, oh, I only lost by 2. If I had leadership 9, I'd be leadership 7, and I'm better off passing leadership 6. It's like, yeah, but you might have taken 1 extra wound. Anyway, like it's a losing strategy if you need leadership 9 for that reason. I think the leadership 9 is important for like steadfast and stubborn, where you're actually relying on losing, but like staying there basically. It is obviously important if you find that, like restrains, march tests, frenzy checks, anything like that, and you're like, well, it's difficult doing all of that on multiple units with Discipline 8 as opposed to Discipline 9. But I would sort of counter that and say, like, if you get 15-inch bubble, you're also giving you're either giving yourself the ability to run wider, which is helpful, or you're giving yourself more units that you're giving leadership 8 to, which are often leadership 7 based. So I think there's an argument to say that I'm not really sure which one is better for Beast Herds, particularly when you can auto-pass Primal with the Crown of Horns. If the Crown of Horns didn't exist, then I would say this is bad for Beast Herds, but because it does, I think that there's an argument either way, basically. Not only that, but being able to have... So in an army that likes to play wide, but because of leadership issues often struggles to play wide, having an extra Commanding Precense bubble could be really handy. I'm not sure what the overall effect will be. I know there has been some argument to say that it's just going to make all competitive lists take either a Minotaur Warlord or a Beast Lord, and I don't think that's right. I don't think that all competitive... I mean, so to get down to it, Beast Herds were like ranked basically the lowest army over the last year. So, frankly, I don't think there's a huge difference, relatively speaking, between number 1 and number 15. KOE weren't in the list because they had an LAB released. I don't actually think it's that significant if you just play. Like, playing better is more important than having a stronger army, basically. So I like there's not a whole lot of like this was the dominant, like these were the dominant Beast Herd builds that were doing really well over the course of the year. Like we don't have that because they weren't very well represented and they weren't doing very well. But of the list that I saw in competitive events, it wasn't a situation where the army always either had Minotaur Warlord, Beast Lord, or Crown of Autocracy on their general. I think there were plenty of builds that I saw that didn't have Crown of Autocracy. I would in fact say it was probably less lists had Crown of Autocracy and a non-Beast Lord or Minotaur Warlord general than that had Crown of Autocracy on a non-Beast Lord or Minotaur Warlord general. Saying which one's better is a little bit difficult because I don't have them. I'm not analysing them. I don't have the results or anything in front of me. But I've seen enough to say that I don't think it'll be a situation where, say, anyone who's looking to take Beast Herds to the ETC will go, I need a Beast Lord or a Minotaur Warlord to be competitive. I think you can work. I think Beast Herds can succeed perfectly well. Some builds less than others. Obviously, your army build matters for what your general is. But I think some builds can succeed perfectly well with a Discipline 8 general. So I don't think it's all a nerf. I think it's a nerf to some lists. I think it's a buff to other lists. And I think it will take some time to see how it affects list building and what other things are available. Because it'll affect, like, all of these things affect other armies as well. So Undead getting a plus 3-inch bubble. Like, you might see Dark Coaches for VC dropping points over the next year or two because all of a sudden their one role of like being an extra bubble isn't as important. So you can take something that's not 460 points. Maybe they're not used as much, so maybe they start coming down in points. I feel for Orcs and Goblins players because I think this is a big hit for them. But I actually think it's probably more interesting for the game as a whole, having that Crown of Autocracy change. Man, I've already spoken for 25 minutes. I haven't even gotten to the Beast Head stuff. I'm moving on. Okay, so Beast Herd buffs. A lot of these are fairly minor, but I'll go through them all in sort of their categories. So the ambush limits of all, I guess, 4 out of our 6 ambush units, if I'm thinking about that right, have all increased. So Mongrel Raiders and Feral Hounds have stayed the same, but I don't think Feral Hounds had a cap. I don't think Raiders did actually, so it doesn't actually matter. Mongrels have gone from a maximum of 30 to a maximum of 40. Wildhorns from a maximum of 25 to a maximum of 30. Longhorns from a maximum of 20 to 25. And Centaurs from 8 to 12. So, again, I'm not 100% sure. This is one of the things we asked for in like the 3 changes that sort of the ACS talk to the community about and suggest through to the rules team. I'm not 100% sure this is going to suddenly make people taking a whole bunch of ambush lists, but they definitely seem more appealing to me now. A unit of 25 Longhorns, as opposed to a unit of 20, I think is significantly more dangerous. Same for Wildhorns. I'd be a little bit reluctant to ambush my Mongrels and Centaurs. I think there's too much that needs to go right for Centaurs for ambush to be worth it. So if I have a unit of 12, I might consider paying 24 points for ambush, but usually in my list that I include Centaurs, I look at that option and I go, there's no time I want to ambush them. Mainly because I don't want them to be sober, because you then need basically either a Commanding Precense bubble that ambushes, but it would be maximum leadership 8, so maybe Crown of Autocracy could help, but still. But more often probably a Centaur Chief who ambushes with them to, once they come on, make them drunk, because otherwise they take, 3 wounds to shooting or something, and there's a chance you lose what's probably a 300 or 400 point unit. So I don't love that, basically. I guess they could take Banner of Discipline. I guess there's a few things, like Centaurs ambushing maybe. It's never really worked for me, and I don't know that a unit of 12 is making it more appealing, but it's definitely making it more appealing for me for Wildhorns and for Longhorns. Enchantments, basically just like all of them have gone down a little bit, except for one. So I'll go to the next page as well, but Hawthorn Curse has gone down by 5, and so has Twin Hungers, Obscuring Fog, Pillager Icon, and Inscribing Burn. Going down to the nerfs, the Crown of Horns has gone up by 5 points, which, it's still almost an auto-include for me, so, I don't know. I feel like that's, starting to approach what its actual cost is. So, once again, the Crown of Horns thing is the sort of thing, 5 points more might break some builds, which is the annoying thing. Like, if you've got a build for a character you like, and then all of a sudden he's 205 points, it's pretty annoying. The Beast Lord changes. His Razor Dust Chariot finally didn't go up, so that's good. But the Lance went down by 5, and the Raiding Chariot mount went down by 10. I don't think I've ever seen a Beast Lord on a Raiding Chariot mount, so eventually, if it gets cheap enough, you'll probably start to see that. I just think that the Razor Tusk Chariot +1 to charge range is too important. So I don't find that the Razor Tusk is all that valuable. The Raiding Chariot gives you a better armor save, but all of that, and now that it's like an 80-point difference or something, I still look at it and I go, I want the +1 to charge. I don't want to be a Movement 7 Chariot character. And I don't want to rely on having, another Razor Dust Chariot next to me when I'm like, that's 240 points and I could just pay 80 more to get a better mount, even though I think that it's really unreliable. And one worse armor save, which often doesn't matter anyway. Minnow Warlord. So basically, he's gone down from 490 to 475, and the Beast Axe has gone down from 30 to 25. But the Minnow Warlord has increased the paired weapon cost from 30 to 45. So essentially, what's happened there is they've taken some of the costs from the Minotaur Warlord and put it onto the paired weapons, because presumably paired weapons is what you're seeing with most. It's great for me, though, because my Minnow Warlord doesn't use paired weapons, so I'm enjoying that. The Centaur Chief has gone down by 5 points on his base cost, ambush, and on the beast axe. But paired weapons have gone from 10 to 15. I think they were pretty much always the best choice, or the most common choice, I should say. I do know that in the old lists that Fred used to run, where it was like lots of single models, lots of Briar Beasts, Centaur Chiefs going up and vanguarding and placing the Sea of the Dark Forest. I think Jabberwocks and Cyclops as well. He always felt that Beast Axe was needed on the Centaur Chief, so that's potentially in some builds a pretty good bonus, just making them 10 points cheap, particularly when you take multiples of them. The Soothsayer changes, there's only really one that is specific to Beast Herds, because the rest of them are the same across the game. The base costs of almost all wizards went down by 15. Apprentice wizards, I should say. So we've gone down from 160 to 145. But the Adapt upgrade is now 95 rather than 75, so the overall cost of an Adapt is up by 5. And the Master upgrade went from 225 to 265, which means that's an overall increase of 25. In terms of for the Beast Herd specific thing, the Chariot doubled in price from 20 to 40, which is apparently basically because it was viewed by like all the community feedback that Rules Team got, like the surveys and things like that. Probably specifically the Shamanism, Trickster's Cunning combo on the Chariot was the reason for it, but it was viewed as a very powerful option internally, so the Chariot price has gone up. Annoying thing for me, because basically the sum of all these changes with my Double Master Chariot Wizard list, my characters who were at like 1760 out of 1800 character points have gone up by 100 points, so there's some shifting there, and it's bad for me, but the magic changes are game-wide, so it's not that much of an issue. Like, I think all Beast Herd players will basically feel the pinch of that, because, you know, even if you've got some points decreases elsewhere, you're probably taking a Master Wizard, and so you've probably lost 25 points there, and if you were taking a Chariot on him, almost no one takes 2 Chariot Wizards from what I see. I do, but if you take him on a Chariot, it's an increase of 45, so that will probably be the hardest hit nerf. Basically that, those point increases, and if you were relying on Crown of Autocracy and don't think your list can run without it, those are probably the 2 most significant nerfs that this update is going to bring for Beast Herds. Okay, so going back here, a few sort of not that important changes. Additional Mongrel Raiders have gone down by 1 point. Briar Beast has gone down from 100 to 90. I actually think that it's quite handy to have 1 Briar Beast in your list already, so that's welcome. For Craig Johnson specifically, you know, throwing weapons have gone down from 4 to 3, so they're trying to entice him back to Beast Herds. Gargoyles, again, additional models have gone down 1 point. I think that takes it a max. So a minimum unit is 140 these days. A max unit is 200, and that takes it down to being 195. I don't think that's a meaningful difference. If you weren't running them in a max unit before, or with additional models before, I don't think this will make you run them now, same as the Mongrel Raiders, but I do actually think that in the right combos, a big unit of Gargoyles can be quite good. You don't see them much, and I think part of that is probably model restrictions. Not many people have a lot of Gargoyle models, but I think they're decent. It's just that they're also our best chaff by far. Like, they're a really good chaff piece, so you sort of, it's a little bit like saber-toothed tigers in or saber tusks, whatever the tigers are in Ogre Khans, where it's like, hey, yeah, I'd love a core unit of tigers, but I want my 3 chaff pieces, and those are my chaff pieces, so 0 to 3 limit ruins it there. So I think it's a little bit of the same thing, where you don't see larger units of Gargoyles because people are like, I've got 10 Gargoyle models, I'm going to take 2 pieces of chaff, rather than 1 big unit and chaff elsewhere. Longhorns, 1 point less for additional models. It's just sort of, I mean, on a big unit that could be like 20 or 30 points. It's not nothing, And I guess it's just sort of like, it's probably not going to make you run big units of Longhorns if you're not already, but it just makes it a little bit better if you are, I guess. And it's probably not going to make you go like, "Ooh, they're actually really cost effective now, I'm going to take them." But potentially if you do, you're realizing, oh, I can fit in this as well. I think it'll help a little bit if you want to run Longhorns. It's not huge though. Raiding Chariots, the base cost has gone down from 115 to 110, but the additional models have gone up by 5 points each. So basically, if you're taking the units in call, they're now 5 points more expensive, which, whatever. I don't think you saw many single Raiding Chariots. I still don't think you will, and I don't think 5 points is very significant anyway. Razor Tusk Chariots, this is probably the section which is most significant in terms of points decreases at this point. So Razor Tusk Herd are actually 3 points less for additional models. So, a unit of 6 is now costing you 15 points less. I think it's just one of those sort of slow iterative processes where eventually that's going to be a good unit. I don't like them. I've used them a few times in a few different list combos. I didn't like them in the Smith F tournament. I haven't liked them previously. I just don't think they're... if I compare Razor Tusks with Centaurs, there's basically no time that I don't want the Centaurs and I'd rather take Razor Tusks. So, for me, that price would need to drop more to be worthwhile. But, we'll see what happens. And yeah, some people do like Razor Tusk Herd, so this is just like a nice bonus for them, basically. The monster section is definitely the most significant for the specific reason that the costs have reduced enough to allow... that's wrong. 320. 220 for a Cyclops would be a massive buff. So you could run 6 monsters. And I've got some sort of combos and stuff that I'm going to go to after this where we'll see what's possible. But basically... they've all gone down by 10 points. The Jabberwock's gone down by 15. And Big Brother on the Giant has gone down by 5. The only thing to note there is the fact that the Beast Giant now does actually have to take a weapon. So you can't, say, have the Seed of the Dark Forest and be like, well, I'm going to pay 5 points less and they're all going to pick up an uprooted tree at the start of the game. Which, I mean, it's fine. That's still a 10-point decrease on any giant with a weapon, which I think is... You're probably taking a weapon if you do. And I think that was another sort of game-wide change where the Orcs and Goblins giant had a problem where the Wrecking Ball needed to be cheaper, but they didn't want to make the giant without a weapon any cheaper. So... I guess they could have just changed the Orcs and Goblins giant, but I think because giants are sort of a shared unit, they like to have them quite uniform except for the specific differences in weapon and giant C, giant do. So it makes a bit of sense, I guess. And realistically, I think that taking a giant with a weapon is generally more interesting than taking one without a weapon. So, I mean, a giant without a weapon is like a glorified Razor Tusk, basically. So, but yeah, that's still anyone who's taking a giant with a weapon, it's still a decrease of 10 points because none of the weapons went up in cost. I assume all of this is final. This was shown about a week ago internally. I assume it's final. But theoretically, there might be changes if feedback has come back internally that said, oh, hang on, you've missed this. I did ask, because we had the issue last year of the balance patch was released. Actually, before the release, I noted that you could take 6 monsters now. So I was like, hey, rules team, this is possible. I just want to make sure that it's intentional because, we're going to talk about it with the community and, if it's not intentional, I don't want to trumpet it up. And the feedback came back saying, oh, yeah, I think it's fine. But then they had, in follow-up conversations, not all of the rules team were actually aware, and they were a bit concerned about what would happen if you could give 6 monsters to Beast Herds. But now they're like, look, Beast Herds is pretty weak, relatively speaking. We don't think it's a problem. The monsters need to come down in cost anyway. So, being able to field six monsters is now a thing, which might be an idea, quite frankly. Like 6, because I think you could still. Oh, it might be tight with the wizard changes. I think it might be tight. He might need to have too few gear, or too little gear. But I think you could probably go double Minnow Warlord, 6 monsters, and a Druidism Master. And I think that's at that point a pretty good single model focused list. It's unfortunate you can't fit a Gortak in that, but I'm pretty sure you can probably fit a Gortak and 3 other monsters. So you're still pretty decent in terms of monster representation, even if you want that Gortak in there. I wonder if you can go 480, that's 960. You've got 840 points left. No, I don't think any of those fit. Because 290 is 580. No, okay, so you can't take double Gortak and 3 other monsters. You can only take, if you're wanting to take 5 monsters, you can only take 1 Gortak. So that's the changes. As I said, I'll list all of the changes in the video description. When I post this to the forum, I'll also include it with like the full list of changes. But I just want to bring up a few things that I was considering on New Recruit. So this is all still the old points because it hasn't been updated. But as you can see, you could have 6 monsters. You could have 2 Cyclops, 2 Jabbers, 2 Beast Giants, which I think is actually quite a good representation. The previous year's possibility was like 1 Cyclops, 3 Naked Giants, and 2 Jabbers. So it was a little bit like, I don't know if these Giants are worth it. I don't know if 1 Cyclops is worth it. But as soon as you've got a pair of all of them and your Giants have got an uprooted tree for the auto hits, I think that's a good monster setup that could be very useful. I don't think you can take anything else on the Giant because it'll become too expensive. But basically this was 1860 before, and now it's 1790. So if you were you wanted to sort of go all out on like single model type stuff, you could take those 6, and you could take 3 Briar Beasts, which is now 270 points for 3, and you'd have 2,060 points spent on 9 single models, and you'd still have almost 2,500 points for characters and core and scoring and shit. Other ideas I had, so now it's not massively because they're 15 points cheaper, but it does factor in. I think that having an ambushing apprentice soothsayer, with ancestral carvings or not, and with any of the number 1 spells because they're all useful. But so with ancestral carvings it's 200 points now, and without it's 150. So pretty reasonable cost. And then you take a unit of, so in this case I've done a unit of 28 Wildhorn Herd because in your recruit it's like you can't, like if you're over 25 you can't ambush. So I've just figured you could take 2 units of 28 ambushing Wildhorns with paired and throwing weapons, full command, a totem, and Banner of the Wild Herd, and that would be all of your core. You could fit in your either 150 if you want the like extra damage output and a little bit of defense, or 200 points for your Soothsayer into this unit, and then you've got, let's say that you take Ancestral Carvings, because I generally would. You've then got a 750 point unit. It's leadership 8. The wizard can sack a wound to make them reroll panic. And you've got at least 2 magic buffs over there in range. You might even do this twice, so if you've got 2 of these units, you might have 2 apprentices ambushing with them, and then all of a sudden you're probably going to have 3 spells in range in terms of both of the apprentice spells and then one of the bounce, and then like because 1 unit each can cast the bounce spell. So I think that's possibly in the right list quite a good combo where that Soothsayer rule, I think it's called Blood Sacrifice. I think it could be really cool and really handy. And it could have been done with the 20 units of 25 Wild Horns, but I don't know, doing it with the larger units, to me, it, like, I don't know if it's actually all that significant, but to me it makes them seem more threatening. Maybe it's just a combination of you've got some more bodies to make it a better unit, and you've got a cheaper wizard on, which is basically the upgrade that you've tacked onto the unit. But I think in the right list, it's a decent idea. I've done a Beast Chieftain that I've seen a lot, basically. His kit out isn't right here because it wouldn't let me do it. But basically, this is the guy that you sit in your block of Wildhorn herd with shields. So you give the Wildhorn Legion standard, and then this guy now, because Banner Discipline is 20 points, you can give him Banner Discipline, and you can give him Legion standard, so you get the 5 ranks into your Wildhorn block. But because the Banner Discipline is on him, you've sort of got 2 bonuses there, where one, if you don't think that putting him in the Wildhorns is a good option for the matchup, you don't have to, and he's still going to carry his Autopass leadership to wherever Autopass panic to wherever he goes, because he's the BSB and he's got it. And the Wildhorn herd block that you've bought are still going to have 4 ranks, because they've got the Legion standard inbuilt. So I think that combo has become better by the Banner of Discipline going down to 20 points. I've just included my favourite Minotaur Warlord build, because I think he's a lot of fun, and he's gone down by 25 points, so he's now 630 rather than 655. And another idea that I had, so this Beast Lord is actually 360 points, with the new Crown of Autocracy at 30. He's on the Raiding Chariot, which is, what I said I haven't seen. I've given him a Lance. Sorry, he's not. He's 355, because the Lance is also cheaper. In fact, he's cheaper than that, because the Raiding Chariot's 10 points cheaper. So he's 345. That's actually a lot better value. So he's 345. He has a 2-up armor. He's strength 7 on the charge. And he's giving you a 3-inch leadership 9 bubble, which you can pop anywhere. So if you have the character points available, and you were thinking, maybe I want to buy a Razor Tusk Chariot, I'd look at this and I'd go, how much is the Razor Tusk Chariot? That hasn't gone down. It's 240. So you would look at this and you'd say, okay, for 105 points more, what am I getting? I'm getting Leadership 9 on the Razor Tusk Chariot itself. I'm getting 4 Strength 7 attacks on the charge, where I lose 1 Strength 6, or 4 Strength 5 attacks, not on the charge, where I lose the 1 Strength 6. So I've got a better crew that makes sort of grinding and on the charge better. Higher offensive skill as well. I've got plus 1 armor, plus 2 armor even, I think. Oh, I can't see the stats on your recruit because I haven't paid for it anymore. I think the Razor Tusk Chariot only has a 4-up armor. I'm checking that, by the way. That's what's happening. It's a great video. Razor Tusk Chariot, heavy armor, armor 1. So it's only got a 4-up. So you've actually got plus 2 armor, and you've got an extra bubble for leadership, which is really handy for. So if you've got your Crown of Horns guy giving out his Autopass primal, you've now got an extra bubble over somewhere else where you're giving a leadership 9. Leadership in general, but also just particularly for Primal Fury, or Primal Instinct, it's quite important. And for 105 points, I think. I guess actually the one thing that is a trade-off here is that you're not even a Razor Tusk Chariot. So why am I comparing it to the Razor Tusk Chariot? Because the mount's worse. It's a bit different because he doesn't have the plus 1 bubble. Yeah, I don't know why in my head. I think in my head because I was like, yes, a Beast Lord on a Chariot is always on a Razor Tusk Chariot. So I've made those assumptions. So it's not quite as great value as I thought, but I still think it's good because you've still got all of those things that I said. About 3-up, yeah. I mean, compared to a Raiding Chariot, it's a lot more expensive, but it's a lot better. I think basically his main thing is the fact that he's got good armor, and he's giving out that leadership bubble. So if you've got the 345 points or whatever that it costs in your character allowance, I think he's probably better than most monsters. Point for point, I think that he could synergize really well with a lot of your army. He probably doesn't work as... It's probably not as important to have him in, like, the monster spam list, because they don't benefit from his leadership as much. Like, they're not taking panics. Then, well, I mean, they are, but only for other things dying, not from taking wounds or whatever. So they're taking fewer panic tests. None of these guys have Primal Fury. I think he's probably better off maybe not bodyguarding, but like hanging out with a unit of centaurs or minotaurs on a flank or something where they're separate from your army, but you want to give them a bit of leadership help. Is there anything else that's... Even a unit of Razor Tusk Herd, which giving them leadership... like not having a reroll is a little bit sketchy there, but giving them leadership 9 is quite a significant buff to allow them to play wider from your lines, with the decrease in additional models on Razor Tusk Herd. I think it could be very valuable. I think that's sort of like the favorite little combo, little tricky character that I found in this update, basically. I do like the idea of the Soothsayer and the Wild Horn Herd, but that's not new. That's sort of, it's improved, but it's not a new concept. Whereas the additional Beast Lord giving out a 3-inch Inspiring Presence bubble is a new thing that you could explore, and it could open up a lot of options for the Beast Herd army and how you're able to construct it and how wide you're able to play. Because you could do the same thing. I mean, it's probably, if you're not putting him on a chariot, it's sort of like, if he's sitting inside a unit, how far is his 3-inch bubble going? It's probably mainly useful on a chariot, I think. You could also do the same thing if you've got enough kit. Like, if I didn't take Potion of Swiftness on my Minotaur Warlord, I could fit in, because I haven't taken full item allowance, I could fit in 30 points onto him. And then he could be the same thing. He could be a little roving leadership bubble without needing to be the general. It's probably most useful on Beast Lord or Minotaur Warlord because of their leadership 9. But yeah, I think, see, it's that sort of thing where I think that the Crown of Autocracy change has opened up as many possibilities as losing the +1 discipline has lost us in Beast Herds. For other armies, it might be different. But for Beast Herd specifically, I think that's opened up more opportunities for us than us. Oh, yeah, I think it's opened up more opportunities than what the +1 discipline opened up. Particularly because the +1 discipline, you didn't need to take Crown of Autocracy to get that. You could take a Minotaur Warlord or a Beast Lord. So, and they're both quite handy units on their own. But having an additional leadership bubble, I think could be quite significant in how the army is able to play. That's basically it, I hope. This has been interesting. Doing only one army, I feel like I've rambled quite a bit because it's now like 54 minutes that this has gone on for. So, yeah, look, I will post up all the information on the forums. I'll also have the full list of changes to the Arcane Compendium and Beast Herd book in my description. I hope you've enjoyed it. And yeah, it'll be interesting once this comes out officially and we're able to play events with the changes and see what lists come about from it. Anyway, guys, I'll catch you next time.